Ken Marslew. Welcome to Roll with the Punches.
Good morning, Tiff.
You've been rolling with him this week, you just told me.
It looks like it. How come you still look so attractive when you've been smacked in the chop so many times?
I've let all of the black eyes heal, and I don't know, like I've got quite a pointy little fragile looking nose, and it blows my mind to think how many punches landed on it and it never got broken. It's quite a miracle, I would say.
Right.
It's no testament to my skills when it comes to defensive movement. I can absolutely guarantee that.
You should be a good ducker and weaver.
Look, I think I could be better. But I have put the hours into learning the craft, so
Right.
definitely better than I was. Well, I've been this morning reading and looking into your history and your life and your organisation, and God, I think we're going to need 3.5 days to talk about it all. I've got so many questions. You're a fascinating human doing
It's been
fascinating things.
It's been a hell of a ride, Tiff.
Oh, I can only imagine. When you run into people these days and they ask what you do, what is your answer to that?
I run an organisation that looks after victims of crime.
Amazing. And do people
That's
ask,
the
why do you
that's
do that?
and that's when it starts to open up the reason why, and then we work with offenders as well. And that draws a lot of criticism. How can you work with victims and offenders? Um,
Really?
yeah. And again, people say you can't do both. Look, long ago when we started working with the other side, it was real easy. Look, when you look at the world through the eyes of a victim, that's how you see the world. And I've been there.
Yeah.
And then when you look at the world through the eyes of an offender, that's how you see the world. But when you look at the world through both eyes, you see the whole picture, and there are solutions in there. And unless you have the whole picture, how can you develop a solution? And I think governments go one way or the other and don't look at the big picture.
I adore what you're doing. I've spoken to a handful of people who are. There's Fritzi Hortzman in the States, and she runs the Compassion Prison Project, which was on the wisdom of trauma. And she goes into prisons teaching the offenders about childhood adversity and their ACE scores and giving insights there. And I love that. So I absolutely adore the research I've done on you so far and what you're doing. Give my listeners a little overview of how it all started for you.
It's been a while ago now, but in 1994, my son Michael was murdered during an armed hold-up. He was shot in the back of the head, point blank range, with a 12-gauge shotgun. And Michael was the last kid that you would ever expect to die violently. He was 18, he was a uni student, he was studying to become a primary school teacher, and he was working at the Pizza Hut where he was murdered, as much for the social side of things as to earn a few dollars and learn a work ethic. And I absolutely was blown away. I couldn't believe that this would happen to a family like us, because we're just ordinary people getting on with pretty ordinary lives, doing stuff. And then this happened. And I must say, anger. And I've never had or sensed anger. I think I've always been slightly angry, but the anger that welled up in me, I hated myself, hated the world, hated everyone in it. And that's how I was living my life. My focus was on getting even, revenge, totally. And that was all I wanted to do. And I started getting involved with other people who had suffered the same sort of trauma that I had. And I began to see that I had a responsibility to myself to take my own life back. And then I started helping others, and I thought I was helping them, but, still full of my own stuff. It was a case of remove the log from your own eye first before you can help anyone else. But that didn't worry me at the time. So we were looking at helping people navigate the system. I got involved with victims groups, but it wasn't palatable. After a while, people get stuck in victims mode. And I was getting stuck in that. And I thought, no, this is not what I want. So I moved from that place and started the organisation Enough is Enough. And Enough is Enough was born to help people in difficult circumstances navigate the system. They'll tell you it's a justice system. That's bullshit. Our system has absolutely nothing to do with justice. It's a legal process. And after 27 years of working in and around it, I can confirm that straight up. It is not a justice system. The word is wrongly placed. So we looked at ways of helping people navigate the system. And it was about 3 years into the development of our organisation, I posed a question. What could you do to stop people from becoming victims in the first place? And that posed a whole new approach to things. I started looking at kids at risk, kids that were doing the wrong thing, led us into juvenile justice centres, and then into mainstream prison. And here was an interesting thing, and a lot of people don't see this, but a lot of the people that are seen as offenders were victims before they were offenders.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to, as a community, we've got to realise that some of the trauma that we as adults have imposed upon kids is the reason the way they behave, the way they do. We're not looking at that. Two of the biggest, I guess, issues I believe we have in society today, number one, the lack of positive adult male role models.
Mm-hmm.
Number one.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is this focus on rights over responsibilities. They, to me, are the two biggest underlying problems that we have, and they need to be dealt with. And we are not dealing with them. They need to be dealt with at a community level. They need to be dealt with at a government level. I think it was JFK, Kennedy, the American president, that said it's not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country. And we've lost that. We have absolutely, everyone's got their hand out for something, when in fact, what are you giving back? And this is leading us to people becoming victims, but we live in a society of victims. Everyone's a victim of something, and they're not looking at healing themselves, but they're looking at support to be healed. But I think that lack of responsibility at so many levels is one of our big issues. So our organisation focuses on responsibility, and we were teaching programs in schools about personal responsibility. We took that into prisons, and we took that to victims as well, encouraging them, okay, yeah, you've had a bad thing happen, but now what are you going to do to take your life back?
Yes. What I want to read two pieces that I read in an article on you, and I want to unpack a little bit of how you processed and moved through this. So, one of the paragraphs: after Michael's murder, I petitioned for the reintroduction of the death penalty. I looked at taking out a contract on Carl, but for a raft of reasons I didn't proceed. I started this anti-violence group dedicated to creating peace and harmony, but I still had so much hate in me that I was prepared to take somebody's life. I have goosebumps reading that, and I'm going to read the other one first, and then I want to unpack both of them. The other one was a statement from Carl saying, I don't have any hate in me because the person who has every moral right to hate me showed me compassion. I've got goosebumps again. And he was responding to the idea that he was in jail and it would have been easier to become a part of the gang and, you know, take on that role, but he chose to put himself out there, get hurt, and not hate and not become what the system would have made him in that situation. How the hell, in the middle of this, like, how do you process hate and move through it and get it out of your body? Because when we hate things, it's a trigger for something else, but it's hard to move through.
Well, it's hard to move through. See, I was a hypocrite at that stage, and I mean a big hypocrite, because here I am talking about peace and harmony and actually planning the demise. And it wasn't just Carl. I wanted the 4 blokes taken out. Right. And so, yeah, absolute hypocrite. It dawned on me, I spent some time with a guy I met who'd had 3 daughters murdered in one night.
Oh.
Guy's name's Sandy McGregor.
Oh my
And
God.
Sandy and I used to talk a lot because he didn't want to be seen as a victim, as I didn't want to be seen as a victim. Our children were the victims, not us. And we spoke for a long time, and I came to the understanding that when you hate someone or something with the passion that I did, you have a little bit of hate for everybody else and everything else.
Wow.
And that hate is destructive. See, I was branded as having forgiven the 4 blokes that murdered Michael. I haven't forgiven, right? I've never, maybe I will, but at this stage, I have not forgiven them. But what I did and had to do was let go of the hate, because hate is like taking poison yourself, trying to hurt somebody else. The damage that hate does, not only to the individual that is doing that, but you have no impact on those that you are hating. And once I got my head around that concept, I set out to let go of hate, because hate is a waste of, it's the most wasted emotion that we have as human beings. And yet, if you have a look at it, most of us hate something. So letting go of hate was the project, not forgiving. To me, that has religious connotations, and I'm not religious. Spiritual, definitely. Religious, no. I think that religion works for some people, doesn't work for me. I think it's an orchestrated manipulation of a set of rules that we can live by, but often don't live by. So, yeah. So it was letting go of hate that was the driving force. And once I let go of hate, I was able to let go of fear and let go of a whole range of other negative emotions. And in doing that, I was able to see things in a different light. Talking about the death penalty, I wanted to be judge, jury, and executioner, and had no bones about playing any of those roles. And so pushing that legislation was a driving force. And then a couple of the things that came up was, no matter what I do to those blokes, I don't bring Michael back. And if I do get to them, it makes me the same as them, and I'm not.
Yeah.
So there were a whole raft of things that popped up in the hate aspect, that letting go of that enabled me to move forward.
Oh, so powerful. Talk me through the experience of first coming face to face and interacting with Carl, and how did you move through that relationship? What was your first experience with it? How much was innate in how you responded and reacted, and how much was you taking a new intention and working on changing that?
The first time I saw it, the 4 murderers, and I'll call them that because that's what they are, the 4 murderers in court, just for a moment, I actually felt sorry for them, because they looked like, and then I remembered what they'd done. And then the hate came back at that stage. Look, I just despised everything about them. But it's real easy to despise someone when you're not facing them. If there's any humanity in you when you face somebody, you have a different perspective. You look at social media today. everyone can hide behind something and say and do. But if they had to confront people, it would be a different approach, because we're different when we have to face something. You were going to ask me a question there.
Oh, no, because I was this morning on my walk. I've been listening to the new Brené Brown book, Atlas of the Heart. And if you haven't read that, or if you haven't heard of her, go and look her up and look at some of her TED Talks. But she's written a new book, Atlas of the Heart, and it's talking about our language of emotions. And it talked about hate, and it said exactly that. She was talking about hate and how it is easier at a distance and much more difficult when you're face to face.
Absolutely it is. There was a process that we went through called restorative justice, which I am a big advocate of, where the victim faces the offender. And I think it's such a powerful process. It gives an offender, if there's any humanity left in them, the opportunity to accept full responsibility for what they've done and the damage and consequences of their actions. But it also gives victims an opportunity to understand what's happened fully and start their own healing process. And this is not what we're doing as a society. We're not giving victims the tools to heal themselves.
Yes.
And I look at the domestic violence space, terrible situation, but we're keeping people stuck in victims mode. And I think what we should be doing is teaching them how to fly again. A lot of these women and children that have been affected by domestic abuse, they're not victims. They are at the time, but they're not lifelong victims. If you've had a trauma, deal with it, work on it, move forward. That's the responsibility that victims have. And I can bet you that somebody's going to stand up and criticise me now, but I've been there, so you can't, right?
Yeah, yeah, and you're so right. One thing I often talk about and pick apart is how all too often, whether it's a short period of time or a long period of time, but a label becomes an anchor, whether it's a mental health label in terms of a diagnosis, whether it's a realisation of past trauma, or even a realisation of a persona you've been wearing. I know at 29 I started boxing, and I realised my whole life I'd created this big persona, and underneath that was a completely different person. And then I couldn't, and then there was, with self-awareness, there becomes a new label about yourself. But if you're not careful about processing that, you can get stuck in the label, and that's all you see.
You are so spot on with that, Tiff. You really are. But society doesn't see it as that. We brand them, and that's the way it is. Mental health. Like if you break an arm, you get it fixed, but you can see that.
Yeah.
Mental health, if you break something mentally,
Yes.
you don't see that. And that label sticks when it shouldn't. It's the same as if you break an arm, you fix it, it can actually become stronger than it was before it was broken. It's the same with our minds.
Yes.
That we can actually be stronger. So labeling someone doesn't help. Oh, he's a nut job. Really? Some of us, I think, have to be nuts to make it in life. If we're going to navigate this system, a little bit of nuts helps.
Yes.
So, yeah, labeling, you're spot on. Labeling people as an offender, as a victim, whatever,
yeah,
I think is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, there's a real juggle in this self-awareness, positivity. There's, changing our mindsets. There's toxic positivity. There's disassociation. Like, I think that when we get into this space, whether it's healing a bad trauma or just wanting to be a better person and change, we want to change. There's such sloppy ground underneath this in terms of what we focus on and getting sucked into it too much. Whether it's, like I said, toxic positivity, pretending, like you could have very well just stayed stuck in your hate and only focused on the facade of healing and what you'd created and pretending that you could have stayed that person and believed yourself.
yeah, but society would have supported me because I was a victim, right?
Exactly.
Okay, and I could have done also. Some people love being victims because people feel sorry for them. They can blame someone else for ruining their life and for not doing this and not doing that. When post-traumatic stress disorder,
Yes.
okay, what about post-traumatic stress growth?
Yes.
If we can learn from a terrible incident, we can actually become more powerful, stronger and more powerful, more capable of dealing with other issues. But a lot of people see issue after issue. They become constant victims or constant offenders rather than looking at breaking that cycle. And again, I'll go back and I said society loves to brand people, just like you've said, and people like to stay in that mold because it feels comfortable. And life begins at the end of your comfort zone.
Yes. Yes. One of my favourites. Talk to me about the offender to offender counselling, because that sounds like something powerful, and people would be, I think some people would struggle to see the value in that.
Offender to offender, no, victim to offender.
Oh, I'd written down offender to offender counselling, which I thought was in one of the articles I read, but maybe it was victim to offender.
I think you find that it's called the restorative justice
Right,
approach.
right.
And it is, I think it's very powerful tool. I've seen it work incredibly powerfully. And again, when you're dealing with people, there's a possibility it may not work.
Yeah.
Because people have different approaches. Everyone handles things differently. But I think that confrontation process is really powerful. And we're not using it enough. It's seen as a soft option. And let me tell you, Tiff, it is anything but a soft option. To sit opposite the person that's harmed you, right? And ask them why they did what they did. And if that person, as I said before, has any humanity, they will tell you why they did when they did it. They may be different now.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. We were working with a family of victims, and I have a counselling unit where we do counselling and psychological services to help people get back on their feet. Anyway, we were working with this family of victims, and they said that the offender is coming up for release in 3 months. We are so scared he's going to come after us. Okay, took that on board because that's our family went through a lot of that, hell of a lot of that. Yeah. Anyway, I took that on board. And I was working in prison, and I'm talking to one of the offenders, unbeknownst to me. It was the offender of the family that had just said that they were scared of what this offender would do when he got out. Wow. And I'm talking to the offender, and he's saying, I'm scared when I get out because I think the family's going to come after me. Now, you sit and think about it. That's reasonably logical.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it have been great to put those two groups together, the offender and the family, and let them discuss it? Because the 5 years that person had been in prison, they changed.
Oh,
the family hadn't. They were still stuck in victim's mode.
Yeah.
So that's just one example. I saw a murder case where we were partly responsible for this happening, where a guy had murdered a girl and was doing a long sentence. He spoke to me when I was in prison. He said, what about this? I would like to apologise to the victim's family. And so I went and spoke to the person in charge of the prison and said, like, this guy wants to do it. So there was apprehension. We then went and spoke with the family, and they said they didn't want to talk to the guy at first, but they then softened up and said, yeah, because we're going to tell him what a bastard he is and all this sort of stuff. So we then had to put it in the hands of corrective services to assess the situation, whether it was appropriate to put the two groups together, the offender and the family group. And when they did, the tension in the room was palpable. And anyway, it started, the questions are always asked of the offender, why did you do what you did? And he went on to say why he did what he did. There was drugs and alcohol involved, and it was a toxic relationship, and it just blew over. And then asked the family how they feel about what had happened. And then it all came out. And as all the information, and this is not the stuff that comes out in court, right? Because you've got, it's manipulated by lawyers and solicitors and defence law. Anyway, all the truth, okay, well, their truth came out. And about an hour into the conference, the mother of the murdered daughter got up and said, I forgive you. Well, the joint just stopped. There's blokes in tears, everyone, because she understood what had happened. And it gave that family a really good opportunity to clear all this baggage that they'd been hanging on to for 10 years. And it gave the offender the opportunity to express his apology for what he'd done. And he was sorry. That offender has gone on to set up a support group for other offenders. And the family went on, they actually split up as a result of this. But it helped them. They both had a new perspective on life. So when you see this stuff happen face to face, it's incredible. It's almost as though you're working at a level beyond our comprehension.
Yeah, 100%.
And I'm not trying to go off with the pixies here, but it's just because it's not the space I work out of. But this is the stuff. And yet, look at this, the same process and I've been trying to get it done for a long time, in the domestic violence space. If you can get the victim and the offender to understand each other, and I do a lot of work in this space. I work with both victims and offenders there. I run a domestic violence prevention program.
Wow.
And I talk to a lot of offenders, and a lot of the guys don't understand exactly what they've done because they've grown up with it, they've seen it, they've lived with it, and it's part of their progression. And when you explain to them what they've done, for a lot of them, they have aha moments. Now, for someone that's done that, to then go back to the victim and genuinely apologise for what they've done. And don't get me wrong here. Victims know how to press buttons. And there is here I'm going to get into trouble again. There's two sides to every story, and it takes two to tango, literally. Yeah. And sometimes that victim has a contribution to that abuse. And so, it's always saying, all blokes are bad, all blokes are rapists, all blokes are domestic violence perpetrators. They're not. And it's to say that all victims are victims of it. They're not, because a lot of victims actually contribute to it, to the issue. And unless we start looking at this holistic picture, we're not going to fix a lot of things. So a restorative approach under supervision in a safe space, if you brought the victims and offenders of domestic abuse together, I think there's a real chance of having. It takes a person who's going to leave a domestic relationship. Statistics prove this. they consider leaving the relationship about 7 times before they actually do it.
Wow.
So as an early intervention strategy with this restorative justice, you may save a marriage. You may save domestic violence. You may get both sides to get an understanding of what's going on. And unless we do this, we're not being fair dinkum. We're trying to break the cycle, and we're doing the same shit every day, expecting a different result. And do you know how frustrating it is to sit on the outside and look at some of this stuff and say, why don't you try this? Oh, no, we can't do that because we're unempowering victims and we're doing. Yeah, are you? Unless you bloody will try it, you're never going to know. But we're so risk averse in this state, and I mean risk averse, that we won't try anything new. Everything has to be evidence based. Now, if it's evidence, that's the buzzword, evidence based. Now, if it's evidence based, it means you're never going to go beyond the parameters that you've already set. Unless you're prepared to go beyond those parameters, how are you ever going to explore a new approach? How are you ever going to try something new? If you're a boxer and they watch plenty of videos of you boxing, they will know exactly what you're going to do when you get in the ring. So unless you come out of left field with something, they pretty well got you sized up. These issues that we're dealing with in society are much the same, Tiff.
Yeah.
We need to be a little different. We're watching it. This is the way it's always been done. Is it? And it isn't working, but we keep doing it when in fact, unless we started to do something a little bit different, we're not going to move forward.
You remind me of, there was a prior episode I had with a beautiful lady that has an outreach centre, and she does a lot of work for the needy and homeless. And I remember something she talked about that made me fire up, and this was around foster kids, because she had 37 foster children, high need foster children, in a 6-year period. Incredible woman. Shout out to Teresa Mitchell. She mentioned how the children can't address you as mum or dad, and you're not allowed to hug them. And I went, so you take these high need children that come from trauma and broken homes, and we pretend as a state or a government, we pretend we're putting them in this loving home, but then we go, actually, accept everything that makes a loving home and heals a human, you actually can't do that. Like, I just got so angry, and I'm like, who is writing the rules for this? Is our country run by psychopaths?
Well, that lady has touched on something that I came across frequently in schools. Kids, after I'd spoken to the kids, some of them were touched by what I had to say about personal responsibility and just wanted a hug. And the school said, I can't do it. I did it anyway.
Good. Good.
Because that's all look, that little bit of human contact. I had a friend who was a primary school teacher. He was in the same boat, same vintage as me. And he said it was frustrating because if the kids fell over in the playground or just scraped the knee all they needed was a touch on the shoulder. And he said, I can't do it. I'm not allowed to do it. So what does it say?
It's a rock and a hard place, isn't it? I don't have the answer.
No, we do have the answers.
All right.
Right?
Let's roll them out then, Ken. You already are.
We're already talking about the answers.
Yeah.
Try something different. Remember, we're humans. Remember that we need human contact. We were doing some work in juvenile justice. We're working some heavy-duty kids. And we're having a deal of success with these kids. And I was really pleased with where the whole thing was going. What would happen in juvenile justice? They get these kids and they get them on the right track and they put them back in the environment that they came out of. The kids have changed. The environment hasn't. It doesn't take long for the kids to get caught back up in the environment again.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you think that changing the environment might be the next step? Wouldn't you?
Yes.
But you can't make contact with the families because there's a breach of confidentiality. And unless you get hold of the families and get them to start thinking differently, all the work you put into the kids is going to be piddled up against the wall within a couple of months of them going back. Now, this is the stuff that's counterproductive to creating the society that we want to create. So that's my frustrating space that I get caught up in.
So funny. Again, I was doing very thoughtful this morning when I was walking. I got quite nostalgic about where I live. I live in Elwood in Victoria. It's a gorgeous little village suburb. It's very leafy. I'm right near the botanical gardens. And all of the streets are named by the great poets. So there's Tennyson Street, there's Byron Street, there's Milton Street, there's Shelley Street. I don't even know about poetry, so I'm just reciting names that I remember someone telling me they were. But there's these stenciled little poems. I've seen them on Tennyson Street often, but this morning I went down Ruskin Street and I saw a stenciled poem that Ruskin had written, and I was just like, I love the idea that someone in this community has made this. Now, there's 3 little library boxes, community libraries, that people have painted and tacked on their front fence. And then I saw a couple more that I hadn't seen before this morning, and I just went, it fills me with joy that the community is not trashing them. They're filled with books. No one trashes them. No one turfs the books. It's testament that environment matters, because this environment, you go to a suburb not too far away, you leave something on the front, or you have an empty shop and it's going to get spray painted. Like, environment matters.
It does.
I love it. I love my little suburb.
What are we gonna do about? I know about Elwood. My daughter used to live there.
So, beautiful.
Yeah. So and a lovely little shopping centre too.
Yes.
Right. So, any questions you want to pose to me on this? You know where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
The fact is that we piss so many people off. Yeah, but it's okay. I think people are like sausages. You've got to prick them occasionally to see what's inside.
Well, it is true. I remember years ago, I had very short but pretty relationships that I'd started with what turned out to be pretty toxic blokes, and very quickly figured it out. But they were that toxic that I had to get intervention orders to stop them contacting me. And it happened twice in a row, and they weren't close together because I'm a bit of a recluse and a little bit avoidant, so it was years apart. But when that second one happened, I realised the part I play. I mean, it's not statistically appropriate to have that happen twice in a row. It's not, the statistics don't lean towards happening to have 2 consecutive intervention orders because of relationships that you've considered with people. So I went, well, this is definitely a Tiffany Cook problem, and Tiffany Cook needs to do some work and figure out her junk. So when you said before that victims play a part, we do play a part, because I needed to change in order for who I was connecting to change. And I think, I'm sure that there would be some sort of alliance, and I don't want to speak out of line in something I haven't had experience with, but for people who, like you said, are inside relationships that have toxic dynamics to them, and we don't know it. Like, I didn't meet these people and go, look, he's definitely going to be a toxic, so-and-so. I definitely should, invite that into my life. From the outside, there was no awareness. But it's the beliefs, it's the conditioning, it's whatever past experiences we can't remember, but that are driving our behaviours and the way we connect with people and ourselves, and we've got to do the work on ourselves.
If a lot of people aren't prepared to do the work on themselves, and I want to challenge you here when you say that statistics actually do prove that people that are victims become victims again and again and again and again, because they don't do the work on themselves. They're comfortable in the relationship, even though it's a toxic relationship. They're comfortable in it without knowing that they're comfortable in it.
Yes.
And it's until they understand, well, I don't like this. It's happened before. Why?
Yeah.
And ask the question. And there's help out there. There is so much help out there for people that want to change in
Yes.
so many ways. And yet they don't put their hand out. Let's go and look at TikTok or social media. That's got the answer. Oh yeah, bloody right. Yeah, let's go and watch maths. Yeah, that's it. We'll fix it.
Yeah, let's just look at the people that I can say are worse than me and more dysfunctional than me, and then I'll feel functional.
Exactly. And that's we're not doing enough for ourselves to make ourselves better people.
Yeah. Here's the dichotomy. The dichotomy is, and I realise that I've always had a very good level of self-awareness, not always knowing the answers, but being able to see patterns or things that I don't think add up in when I look at me and my life and my choices, my behaviours. And when I stepped into the boxing ring and I chose to do this sport I wasn't good at, that wasn't typical of me to choose to do something I didn't feel good at that terrified me. So it sparked my interest. I went, why? I felt a pull. I guess similar to the pull I felt when I decided that these were good guys. I felt this pull and I was like, what is it about this environment? And over time, I realised that a fight or flight environment was comfortable to me. I know me in there. That's really comfortable. You know what wasn't comfortable? Genuine vulnerability and being seen. But being seen in fight or flight, that was comfort. So the dichotomy is, in order to change and get out of a horrible situation that is not good, you have to get uncomfortable and let go of the comfort of that shitty situation. Because even though it might feel weird to say, yeah, I'm comfortable there, that's why we end up there.
Look, we touched on it before when I said your life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And the first time you go outside of it, it is incredibly uncomfortable because you don't like it out there. The second time you go out, it isn't as scary. The third time you go out, you start to feel like this is interesting. It's exciting.
Yes.
And when you talk about so if you're really fair dinkum about improving yourself, have a go. What's the worst that can happen?
Boom.
Nothing.
Yeah.
So unless you try something, nothing happens. And people don't understand that once you start to try and experiment and get outside the book, yeah, you're going to get resistance. You're going to get criticism. All this. That's not the Tiffany I know. That's Tiffany I know does this, that, and that. Yeah, well, guess what? This is the new Tiffany.
Yeah.
Yes. But it gets exciting out there.
Yeah.
But to get someone to take that first step out there is so hard, particularly someone who's been a victim of something. Get them to try something new. It's easier to stay in that old role rather than to try something like you've been a victim. Let's see about you learning to fly again. How can you use that experience to become a better person? What can you do from that experience that's positive? But we're not doing that. A counsellor says, oh, you poor thing, this never should have happened to you. How do you feel this week? Is it any better than it was? And you sit there and think to yourself, because I went to counsellors when it first happened to me. I'm thinking to myself, Christ, where are you taking me? What are you doing to me? It wasn't till you started to mix with people that felt like you did. They wanted something. Okay, this has happened. I can't change what's happened, but I can change the way I think about it. And that then becomes the process, not post-traumatic stress disorder, but post-traumatic stress growth.
Yes.
What can you learn from what's happening? And once you learn, when you say why, and it turns into why me, that's all negative feedback. When you can have a situation and say, what can I learn from what just happened? It's really hard sometimes to ask that question in a real difficult set of circumstances, but you get completely different feedback. You start to see there's a reason why that happened. Now, I can either fix it I can do it again. And if you're half smart, you don't want to do it again. So you learn from your experiences.
Yeah.
But there are so many people that don't.
Yeah. It's, for me, what I've experienced is the need to create space between and be okay with the emotions, but create space between the emotion and the behaviour. Because as I've had to changed my the way who I connect with and how I connect and the story around it and doing the therapy and doing the work, there's been times when interactions have triggered certain emotions and stories. And what I've found is I've needed to pause, not respond, put it under the microscope, be okay, wait till it passes, because the Tiffany Cook in the middle of that emotion and the story that she tells herself is completely different than the Tiffany Cook that I know is the reality of who I am, who the other person is, and what is really going on. But there's still moments of that, and I think that is the biggest challenge, because in that moment of triggered by something or it resembles something or you have a certain feeling or story around it, that's tricky, because in that moment that is your reality.
Absolutely. See, you're very insightful for a young lady.
I do a lot. I'm very curious about this life we're living.
And so we all should be. You know, what can we give to it and take back out of it? There is so much that. Look, I've met people who are dead at 45 and they won't bury them until they're 80. And you sit down and you think to yourself, gee, all the exciting things that you can do, all of the boundaries you can push, but no, they like it the way they are. They're stuck in their comfort zone and there's no moving forward for them. It scares me.
Yeah.
But if you have a look at politics, you look at the way governments are, it's the same thing. Most people want to stay in their comfort zone. I find that scary.
The best thing about, I mean, this podcast I've been running for over 18 months now, and quite by mistake it all started, but the growth of, and I opened up about my childhood traumas publicly on this, so that's where a whole new level of work came in, because all of a sudden the conversation that I thought I dealt with underneath, there was so much to come out of that. But the real beautiful thing that I hold on to is my dad, who's now 70, for the last year and a half listens to every single episode, and we talk deeply. And when I shared some of my broken pieces with him, he shares his with me, and it's, at times at 69 he's saying, you've just changed what things I've believed and carried for my whole life and didn't understand. And he's as curious and fascinated as me. Like, he'll ring up. I drop my episodes at 5 a.m. I get a message from him sometimes at 6 a.m. going, Tiff, when you're free, I want to talk about something in that episode. I want to unpack that. And it's just, if he was the only one person listening and the one life I'd changed, it's worth it.
And he has, as a result of you doing this?
Yeah.
I think that's terrific.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So the student has become the teacher.
Yes. So, ever-present student. Hey, Ken, how can listeners get involved? Is there volunteer work available? Is there fundraising? How can we support everything you're doing?
There is so much that we need because of our diversity and our not fitting into a box. We have difficulty getting funding, government funding, although we are funded by corrective services to do some work and by victim services to do some work, but nowhere near enough funding to do what we do and what we want to do. I would like to poke the bear considerably more, because I think there's a lot more that can be done. So we have a counselling unit where we run programs. We do an art therapy program. We do a stress and anger management program. We do a domestic violence prevention program. And we had 3 psychologists. We're currently looking for a clinician as we speak, but it has to be someone who has the same philosophy that we do. So yes, I need a clinician. We need volunteers. We have a range of projects. We have students come to us and we help them with the advancement of their studies, but they also give a little bit back to us, which is good. So we're always fresh. And we need funding.
And where are you located, Ken? Where's
We're located in the southern suburbs of Sydney, although we do move outside of the suburbs. The office is a place called Janali, which was where Michael was murdered, actually.
Wow.
We sort of stayed around the same area.
Yeah.
A lot of people come from different areas to us. So there's a lot of things people can do to help us. The big one at this stage would be to raise enough funds to get a new clinician. So, yes, if anybody wants to do anything for us, have a look at our website, www.enoughisenough, one word, lowercase, .org.au, or you can contact us by phone on 02 9542 029. So, yes, help.
Well, I love it. I'm going to make a note of this, and if there's any way I can help in the future, please let me know. And yeah, hopefully.
Well, there's actually a couple of people, even though we're an anti-violence group, we still kick bums. Now, with your talents, we might get you up here to sort a couple out for us.
I'm there.
Well,
Mouth guards in hand. I'm ready to go.
Right.
You're a remarkable man. Thank you so much for the courage and the vulnerability and the self-awareness and everything you stand for. I just can't speak highly enough of you.
Thank you, Tiff, very much.